The composer Herbert Howells was going to be a focus of this year's Three Choirs Festival, with several of his works appearing in concerts. And two concerts in particular were connected with my work. One of them was the Cello Concerto performance, which was to be given by Guy Johnston, and the other was a piano recital, which was to be given by Matthew Shellhorn of music that has previously been unknown. Both of these recitals were hugely exciting for me because they're connected to larger projects to record and to reveal to the world more of Herbert Howells, the composer. What tends to happen if people have heard of Herbert Howells, they tend to think of somebody who wrote for the church, and they might know hymn tunes like All My Hope on God Is Founded, the tune Michael, or they might know some of the canticle settings such as the ones he wrote for St Paul's London or King's College Cambridge. And I was very interested in Howells as an orchestral composer, writing outside of the church. And I was also interested in Howells as a pianist, because of course this is where his musical studies started, and he had pianos in his home and in his office at the Royal College of Music throughout his life, and he liked to work out ideas at the piano, so I was fascinated by Howells the pianist. And two CDs have come out recently which showcase these other sides of Howells using editions that I've produced. The first, the Cello Concerto, has been recorded by Guy Johnston on the label of King's College Cambridge with the Britten Sinfonia, and the other recording is by Alice Neary and the Royal Scottish National Orchestra and is on the Dutton label. And this was hugely exciting for me because I looked at the sketches from about 2010 onwards, and it was very intriguing to see where Howells would have gone had he finished the Cello Concerto. It's a work that really occupied a central psychological position in his mind, because he started writing a concerto in 1933, but his son died in 1935, and so it became one of the key works that he returned to each year when he was thinking about his 9-year-old son Michael, and it took on a kind of ritual, and he would write a little bit of the concerto each year. And so the sketches are fascinating because we've got pages of material with lots of little bits, almost like a jigsaw. And he finished the first movement and submitted it for his DMUS at Oxford University in 1937. And he finished the second movement in short score around the same time, but he never orchestrated that movement, and he continued writing lots of sketches for the final movement. And of course, if you don't have 3 movements, you can't perform the concerto. So that was my starting point in 2010. I thought that it would be interesting to come up with some kind of realisation of the concerto so that at least we could hear the bits that Howells did complete, and it would allow me to speculate about what he might have done for the third movement. Now, the first movement's really a very long, extended movement. It's over 17 minutes, and it's a really interesting structure because it's got 2 very large arches where Howells builds up tension and then disperses it very, very gradually, and then he does the whole thing again. So it's got that kind of formal shape to it. But at the same time, if you take it apart as a musical analyst, you'll also see that it has elements of sonata form, and it also has elements of a theme and variations. And of course, in a theme and variations, you get a tune, and then you get variations on it. But in Howells's music, it's all knitted together. So the second that the theme finishes, the first variation starts, so you can listen to it as a theme and variations. Howells wrote in enormously long lines and big paragraphs, so his theme is actually 30 odd bars long, and it's very lyrical. It sounds very much at the beginning like it's an homage to Vaughan Williams, who was a great friend, and it was the 1910 three choirs that really inspired Howells to become a professional composer, and particularly the first performance of the Fantasia on the theme of Thomas Tallis by Vaughan Williams. And the concerto then, having had this very large first movement, moves to a beautifully lyrical kind of song without words in the second movement. But the climax here is a lot darker, and certainly in Christopher Palmer's orchestration, he orchestrated it for the Howells Centenary in 1992. Certainly in Palmer's vision, it's an extremely dark middle movement, almost Mahlerian in intensity. And then the third movement, which I've worked on, really changes gear completely. Howells was very interested in the music of William Walton at this point, and this was really a reversal of their careers, because when Howells was winning awards during the First World War, really that period, William Walton was actually busy copying out scores by Herbert Howells to really understand how this prize-winning composer was going about it. And during the 1920s, when Walton's music was on the rise, Howells and Walton's music was being programmed alongside each other at various points. And I think there's a particular point when Walton produces his Viola Concerto, which is premiered in the same concert as Herbert Howells' song cycle in Merry Ways. And of course, all of the newspapers report on this amazing new concerto by William Walton, and Howells was rather overshadowed from that point. Up until that point, Howells had been kind of put forward as the leading light of the new generation. Anyway, Howells was very interested in the rhythmic energy of Walton's music and the short kind of rhythmic fragments that he used, and an awful lot of the richness of all the cluster chords that Walton uses, all these added notes that make his harmony so spicy and interesting. And so what I think we get in the finale of the Howells Concerto is an attempt to take on some of that edginess and that energy and that excitement. And we certainly get an awful lot of that in at the beginning of the third movement. And we then get a second idea in Howells's movement, which is actually probably closer to Holst. It's in an irregular time signature. It's in 7/8, and it is extremely jolly. But because it's in 7, it's slightly kind of jokey. It could have come out of The Perfect Fool of Holst. It's that kind of jaunty tune, and in my completion, it's really the triumph of the end when this very jaunty tune, which is first heard played by the cello, comes back in the full orchestral tutti, and particularly the full brass have an awful lot of fun playing that tune. And I think this is something that comes out in both of the recordings that you can hear online, so do go and have a listen to those wonderful recordings. The other Howells recital this week was to be Matthew Shellhorn's piano recital. Matthew's just released his CD on Naxos of Howells Piano Music Volume 1, and it's very exciting that he's doing this survey of Howells' piano music. This started in 2017 when Matthew and I were asked to do a lecture recital by the Herbert Howells Society in Cambridge, and I was asked to speak about Howells' piano music, and Matthew was going to play a selection. And it became very apparent when I was looking through what to talk about that so much of Herbert Howells' piano music is either no longer in print, so was published by a variety of publishers at certain points. Some disappeared because the publishers have disappeared. Some disappeared because the pieces were dropped from their catalogue. And it's all quite hard to get hold of. On top of that, there are an awful lot of pieces that people mentioned to me, particularly in the process of writing my book on Herbert Howells, that don't appear anywhere. And so after being initially approached to do that lecture, I tried to hoover up as much of Howells' piano music as I could possibly find, and then we went about this process, Matthew and I, of really considering what these manuscripts meant. And so this involved me producing editions and looking at the various sources and trying to find all of the manuscript sources that I could. It involved asking a lot of people to lend manuscripts, and I spent an awful lot of time in the Royal College of Music Library as well in London, where the Howells Archive is, to try and find all of the sources for these pieces and to unearth new pieces. And in the end, I came up with 28 pieces in manuscript that Howells hadn't published, and I think they've given a really amazing new perspective of this composer that we think of as a choral music composer. And I suppose it starts really with Howells' own playing. When he first came to London to audition, it was at the Royal Academy of Music, and he chose to play the Rachmaninoff C-sharp minor Prelude. And there's certainly a lot of Rachmaninoff in some of his early piano compositions. I think that's one of his major loves at that point. But there's also music that sounds more like Debussy and Ravel, and then it progresses from there. And of course, these are all composers who were incredibly popular at that point. And I suppose as an academic, what I'm most interested in is the way in which English music at this point really brought together all of the things that were popular, particularly in London. And I think we should remember that London was this hotbed of cosmopolitan concert life. And if you went to hear an orchestral concert or a piano recital or a chamber music recital, you would have a real mixture of composers. And certain composers were incredibly popular. People like Tchaikovsky and Wagner had their own night at the Proms still at this point. But there are all sorts of new composers emerging, and we get people like Stravinsky coming on the scene, and Schoenberg, of course, who had some really successful London premieres. And so the world of music is really in turmoil at this point. And I think what English composers did, and what I would say is central to Englishness in music for Herbert Howells at this point, and for quite a few years afterwards, was the fact that it was okay to bring together all sorts of disparate styles. And so we get what I call cosmopolitan form, where you might start a piece with a kind of homage to Rachmaninoff, but it was totally okay 3 minutes in to change direction and then maybe pay homage to somebody else, maybe Debussy, maybe Ravel, maybe Scriabin. And these this way of patching together different influences, I think, was seen as important and as defining Englishness. Howells tended to talk about Britishness. And he would say that he was a Britisher, but a modern too, because he was able to pull together elements of the finest European styles at that time, but he was also aware of what the British audiences wanted. And for him, this was the crucial aspect of getting to the point as quickly as possible. So he wanted music that was formally succinct and direct and had an immediate emotional impact. And so what we have on Matthew's CD are lots of miniatures, and I think this miniature form interest in Howells is part of that Englishness. It's about getting to the point, giving us an aspect of whatever emotion or idea that he wants to as quickly as possible, developing it, but then disappearing as quickly as he appeared, and that's very important. One of the other reasons that he wrote all these miniatures is that they were very often presents. So what he would do if he wanted to say thank you or happy birthday or congratulations on something to a friend, very often he would write a piano piece, a piano miniature. And an awful lot of these pieces were written in one sitting, often in one afternoon or one day. And he would then copy out a neat copy and give that as the present. So when it came to editing this music, we had an awful lot of questions to do with whether Howells had really fully considered the implications of what he was writing, because he tended to do all of this at breakneck speed, and then once the piece had been given to the person who was receiving it, he didn't return to it. So we don't know what he might have done if he was revising these pieces. In some cases, actually, he did ask for the pieces back, and we've got different versions, and Matthew and I have been considering those. So I hope that you can enjoy this recording on Naxos, Volume 1 of the Herbert Howells piano cycle of Matthew Shellhorn. It's been doing very, very well in terms of sales and downloads, and I gather that over 200,000 people have heard this album already. So I'm hoping that you can enjoy this. And whilst we can't hear Matthew playing in person this year, I hope that you'll enjoy this CD. Seek it out. Seek out the recordings of the Cello Concerto and enjoy this side, or these sides, these different perspectives on a composer who is primarily known for his choral music, but can be equally enjoyed be it within his piano music or his orchestral music.